Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Masao Suzuki. I'm a member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and I'm doing another one of my occasional chats on the state of the economy. Happy New Year, everybody. I think we're all hoping that this year will be a lot better than last year in terms of the economy and in terms of people's health. And unfortunately, okay, that's all the smiley part for me, because it's not getting off to a good start. So on Friday, the Labor Department did their monthly report on the unemployment rate and on jobs, and the job report was pretty grim, to be honest. The economy lost 140,000 jobs net in the month of December. And this was much lower than most economists, not me, but most economists expected a very small gain of about 50,000. And of course, it's a lot less than the gain of 300,000 plus back in November. And so that means we're still down 9.8 million or almost 10 million jobs from right before the recession in February. And this is the first actual drop in the number of jobs since the dark days of April. And this means that this is the worst year in terms of job numbers since as far back as records go, which is only to 1939. And it's twice as bad as 2009 following the financial crisis. So this is still the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. And another first, President Trump has become the first president since Herbert Hoover to go in and out of office with a net loss of jobs. And of course, Hoover is the president. He was elected in 28, started office in 29. So he was in office from 1929 to 1933. So he oversaw the worst economic decline in US history. And Trump, another fellow Republican, has overseen the second worst decline. The usual sort of suspects were hit really hard. Restaurants, bars, and other eating establishments lost 370,000 jobs in December as a result of the rising COVID-19 numbers that people turned a lot more cautious. In some states, there are more government restrictions. And then, of course, the colder weather, because a lot of places have been open outside. So I know that's also a situation here. They're not, no more outdoor dining here. Another sector that has actually been losing jobs ever since the beginning of the recession, the most steady job loss, is that state and local governments shed another 51,000 workers. And so they total, starting in March through December, lost 1.4 million jobs in this local and state governments. And they still face, as a whole, hundreds of billions of dollars in budget deficits over the next 18 months. And unfortunately, many of you might know that one of the things that did not get passed in the latest aid package was any aid for state and local governments. So it's looking pretty grim in that area too. Now the official unemployment rate actually stayed the same, but of course, economists, actually even mainstream economists, bourgeois economists, mainly look at the jobs report because the unemployment numbers are affected a lot by who's looking for work. So if you stop working, if you're laid off and you give up looking for work, you're not counted as being unemployed. And so, in fact, since what we call the labor force participation rate, that is the percentage of the population that's either working or looking for work, that actually peaked back around 2000 at the end of the internet boom. And since then, it's the labor force participation rate has lost about 5%. So in effect, one way to look at this is that if everybody who was trying to work, was looking for a job at the same rate they were back in 2000, our unemployment rate, instead of being 6.7%, would be 11.7%, which is, of course, would be the highest since the Great Depression. And even in this recession, there's been a continued loss of people basically being forced out of the labor force. It's hit women really hard because of still the traditional tendency for women to carry more of the burden of domestic work, childcare, and child rearing. And with many schools and a lot of childcare centers closed, they've been forced out of the labor force. So about 20, 30 years of progress in terms of women gains in the labor force have been wiped out just this past year. Also, the overall average can hide differences. Just last month, Chicano and Latino workers were hit very hard. Their unemployment rate rose by 0.9%, 0.9%, because of their big presence in the job sector, restaurants, bars, etc., eating establishments that were closing down. Unfortunately, this is really largely due, of course, to the worsening situation with the pandemic. Not this well, actually, no, it is this previous week. Seems time goes by very quickly, but we've just made new records day with over 300,000 new cases, and another day with over 4,000 people with the dying pandemic as a result of COVID-19, not this pandemic. And so unlike earlier surges in the spring and summer, which were in the spring, it was largely concentrated in the Northeast, and then in the summer, there were surges in the South and Southwest, and then in the Midwest. But now it's really almost the entire country, and every state is seeing record levels of the COVID-19. And this is putting a large stress on the hospital system. We have a record number of people in the hospitals, I think over 130,000. And before, they used to get a lot of staff. In fact, I've been learning a lot more about healthcare, but there's a whole sort of sub-occupation called traveling nurses. And so these are nurses that would move around and were able to respond to the earlier surges. But now, almost with every part of the country being hit, it's really local areas that are hard hit, like in Southern California, can't rely on getting workers from other areas. And because this pandemic, it's showing some signs, but they're not definite, of hopefully topping off very soon. But the January jobs report is actually going to be, the survey is going to be done next week. And so given the pandemic situation and the situation for restaurants and bars is worse today than in mid-December, it's quite likely the January report is also going to show a loss of jobs. So we're definitely not off to a good start. Excuse me. So there's been a lot of hope, I think, about the new vaccines, which actually, and I've also tried to learn more about vaccines. I'm actually an economist, but before I was an economist, I wanted to do molecular biology, which is very close to involved in all of this vaccine development. And they are evidently very effective, 90 to 95%. But the rollout has been extremely slow, and it varies quite a bit from area to area. And this isn't just a matter of the Trump administration's incompetence, although that's a big factor. And the fact, of course, he's either interested in whipping up violence or trying to protect his ass from the consequences. So he's on a golf course giving speeches or hiring lawyers, but he's certainly not thinking at all about the pandemic. And there's the county where I work, which I shall not name, but the county where I work is a very well-to-do county. It's had at times in the top 3 of all counties in the United States in terms of average income. But one report they gave said that, oh, we hope to get through the healthcare workers and the elderly in residential homes by the end of February. And so since this is about, on average, about 7% of the population, I don't know the exact numbers for this county, but at that rate, you really need about 70% at least to crush the pandemic. It would take them 20 months or till August 2022 at the current rate if it isn't sped up. So it is really lagging. And there's definitely places that are doing better than that. And I'm afraid I'm sure there's some places that are doing worse because the whole decentralized healthcare system and for-profit healthcare system is not really set up to deal with vaccinations, because you don't make money off of vaccinations because they tend to be, one and done. And so if you look on TV during the day, you will see all kinds of ads for chronic conditions, because this is what the drug companies can profit off of, something that you'll need to take the drug, ideally for the rest of your lives. And so hopefully, I certainly don't think the Biden administration can do worse, but I hope my positive expectations are not dashed. The other thing, which it is a problem, is that there's a new variant of the virus. It's actually, depending on how you count it, it may be like the 4th variant. And unfortunately, each one, they don't get more deadly because it's actually not in the virus's interest to kill you, but they get more contagious. And so this one that was mainly noticed in terms of Britain, and it's actually in Ireland too. And so both those places, despite more stringent restrictions by the government on businesses than here in the US, their case numbers are soaring. And it's showing up in different places in the US. And again, while the US likes to tout its high technology prowess, but we haven't set up the type of genomic testing needed to identify these new viruses. And, there was sort of also in the beginning a little bit of a, what me worry kind of attitudes, saying things like, oh, viruses always mutate. Well, that's true. I mean, but you wouldn't feel better if you say, oh, 4,000 people die. Well, the fact of the matter is people, almost everybody dies, that's no, and to hear this response coming from doctors and scientists is really irritating. Of course, it's going to be a big worry. So anyway, that may not turn out well. So the next, at least the next month or so is going to be pretty rough despite the rollout of the vaccine. let's see. Maybe I'll switch to some of the chat questions. So one question, I'll take it first, since I was sort of talking about, do you think once the vaccine is widespread, it'll kickstart the job market? Most economists, again, are thinking that once the vaccine and perhaps a little bit of help from warmer weather can turn the pandemic around, this will really kickstart the, job market. And it certainly can't hurt. It certainly will help. But I don't, unlike most economists, I don't expect this to be a strong recovery from the recession if and when it actually ends. And the reason for that, in a typical recession, you see a big fall in purchases of homes and purchases of automobiles and appliances, things that people can postpone. But what happens then is you get this sort of pent-up demand of people who want to buy a home or need to buy a new car or need to buy a new stove. And that can really boost the rate of recovery at the beginning of an expansion phase. But this recession has been different. In fact, car sales and appliance sales and so forth have held up really well. And what's been hit the hardest have been services and state and local governments. And the thing is, what's different though, is that while let's say a whole bunch of people, their cars are wearing out, so you get this bigger and bigger backlog of people who need to buy a new car, it's not the same thing with haircuts. So I have gone without a professional haircut for 10 months now. And so I've missed about 7 or 8 haircuts. But once I feel confident about going back and getting haircuts, I'm not going to go, oh, I'm going to get a haircut every week and make up the lost demand. No, I'm just going to get one haircut and it's going to go back to normal. I haven't eaten out, in 8 months, but I'm not going to just, oh, I haven't eaten out, so I'm going to catch up. So a lot of these services are not going to bounce back stronger and sort of kick off the recovery. So I think that will be a major drag on the economy. Another major drag, which is still to be resolved, is a lot of renters have thousands and thousands of dollars of unpaid rent. And while I think these eviction moratoriums, as many evictions still are happening, but they have prevented a lot of evictions. But the fact of the matter is that once people get their jobs back or they get evicted, that debt still remains, and that's going to be a drag, because there's going to be, some landlords are going to, even after they evict people, they're going to pursue them. And some people are going to work out arrangements to stay, but then pay part of their back rent, and that's going to sap their income going forward. And so there's a large amount of housing debt. I haven't seen any estimates of the amount. You see the papers talking a lot about the high savings rate, which is true for those people who were able to keep their jobs. They're often able, like even myself, I've been able to save more because I didn't go on vacation. I'm not going out to eat. But again, this is offset by many, many people who piled up thousands of dollars of back rent. And many of them are going to try to pay some or all of it off, and that will detract from other spending. And then the final thing, of course, is a lot of economists have even remarked about the so-called K-shaped recession, which I just alluded to, that some workers, professionals who are able to work at home are actually doing just financially, not otherwise, but financially a little better than they might have been doing before. And then, of course, there's a smaller number of people who have invested in the stock market, who have done really well. And there's a handful who have become the so-called Tesla millionaires, but they can't make up for the millions of people who have lost their jobs or have had their hours cut and are scraping by. And so this is going to be another drag on the economy, because this type of growing inequality has never turned out well. The two highest period before last year of economic inequality were 1929 and 2007, and we know how those years turned out rather badly. So that's another negative for that. So no kickstart. Oh, I guess in terms of solving the rent debt issue, well, this is a problem with identifying something that no one else has, because I haven't thought a lot about what the solution would be, and I don't know what the possibilities of doing it. I think part of it, especially for smaller landlords, hopefully there can be some kind of a mortgage, forbearance, as they did with homeowners, where they just take the missing payments and stick it on the end of the mortgage. Another thing is, this is a possibility. I am not a lawyer, unfortunately. I'm not sure, and I tend to think that it won't work, because this is not a typical debt where you can try. It's not an unsecured debt like credit cards, where you can try and wipe out some of them through bankruptcy. This is a ultimate security debt, where the landlord can tell you you've got to go because you haven't been paying. And so I think there has to be a way, though, that people are not going to be able to pay. And some of it will also depend on, how much power tenants have to just try and get landlords to cut a deal to reduce their back rent. I think that'll be somewhat common, although very, again, uneven, and it won't totally resolve the issue, because I would expect almost all landlords will try and collect at least some of the back debt. Just in terms of unemployment insurance, that's a good question. I can only speak for California, because the unemployment insurance system is basically funded and maintained by the state. Here in California, the good news is that the payroll tax that pays for unemployment insurance is only paid by the employer. It's not paid by the worker. So it's not like Social Security or Medicare, where if you look at your check, you're paying a certain amount. If you look at your paycheck, you're paying a certain amount to the government for Social Security, a certain amount for Medicare, and then actually you don't see it, but your employer has to match that, has to pay the same amount. With unemployment insurance here in California, you don't, the worker doesn't pay anything, so that's good. Now the bad news is that while, for example, for Social Security, they tax, I think it's about the first $130,000 of payroll income. And then for Medicare, there's no limit. So you get taxed on all of your earned income, on all of your paycheck income. But here in California, they only tax the first $7,000 of a person's paycheck. And I mean, who's earning $7,000 a year? That's like, you can't, here in California, even if you're working for the California minimum wage, you'd be making like about $25,000 a year. And so it's our unemployment insurance is way underfunded. We have relatively low payment rates, and the whole system is really creaky. You see jokes sometimes about, the EDD, the Employment Development Division here in California, that handles unemployment insurance payments, hiring people to, oh, we want you to be able to do COBOL because we're still trying to get off these 1970 machines. So it's really underfunded, and this is, so not surprisingly, there's been a lot of fraud. But of course, the state's government, and this is a Democratic state government, it's been, basically a pretty much electoral-wise one-party state for 10 years and more. And so they decided recently to suspend a 1.4 million accounts on suspicion of being fraudulent. And I don't, this number is taken right out of the newspapers. It doesn't even make sense because the state's only paying 1 million people unemployment insurance. So anyway, I don't know what's going on, but I guess even worse, the state has a backlog of 800,000 people who have applied and either never heard back from EDD or, and this sounds crazy, they got one payment and then it stops and then they can't get hold of it. So there's a big problem with basic unemployment insurance here in California. And our government, Democratic government, to be honest, can't make the checks come out on time. So, but you do need to check in your state, and actually, you should be able to check on your paycheck if you're getting one. If you're paying for part of it, it'll show up on your paycheck. Now, there is a question here about another stimulus check. So I think that's going to happen. Now, I don't really know what's going to happen in Congress. I know these checks are very popular. I'll be honest, from an economic point of view, it's not actually the best thing. It would be ideal to target relief for people who are out of work to increase their payments, as opposed to giving money to people like myself who are still working. And as I mentioned, I'm not spending as much. But the fact of the matter is, I think there's an expression about quick and dirty. It's quick and dirty. It's relatively easy to do. It's fast. It actually, because it's a flat payment, it actually helps lower income households relatively more because they get a bigger, the 600 or hopefully another 1,000 or 1,400 goes further for those households. So there will be I think the actual question, will there be a bigger push? Yes, there'll be a bigger push. I'm not holding my breath, but one can always hope. Okay, let's see if there's any other questions. Actually, there's a odd question here about digital currency. And I'm not going to answer the exact question because I'm actually not endowed or I'm not well informed about the specific ones that were mentioned. This is something going forward. And of course, some of the interest around it has been piqued by the rise of Bitcoin, which actually doubled in price last year to $40,000. And this is why I'm not wealthy, because if someone had asked me at the beginning, oh, do you think Bitcoin's going double this year? I would say, no, you've got to be crazy to do that. But yet it did. And so there's this big interest in digital currency. I think, though, what's going to happen is that what's mentioned was a question about a global digital currency. I really don't think so, because one of the sort of very important foundations of a country's sovereignty is having your own money. That's why there were big fights over the euro in Europe. And for example, Britain never joined the Eurozone because they wanted to keep their own money. And so I think the chances of a digital currency in the near future are absolutely, a global digital currency are absolutely zero. And it's a lot of wishful thinking. Now, the interesting thing is there is one major economy that is starting to roll out a digital currency, and that is the People's Republic of China. And they seem to be the most advanced in terms of governments developing digital currencies. Other governments are looking at, like the Federal Reserve Bank here is studying the matter. And once they decide to do something like that, it won't take that long. But I think one of the reasons why it was able to advance in China, what the digital currency does is it tends to undercut a lot of these private digital payment systems. So one of the things the Chinese government has more recently really tried to step up government regulation and control of large private companies. And one of the largest private companies, of course, is Alibaba, which has probably the world's largest payment system, Alipay. And so this digital currency ultimately could replace Alipay, and there's other digital currencies in China with a unified government digital currency. And I think that's part of the resistance here, because the private banking system has direct influence on the Federal Reserve. And so a US digital currency would tend to cut into the profitability of some of the big Wall Street titans. I do think some form of it is coming here, because the US is not going to allow the Chinese digital currency to spread all over the world without trying to challenge it. I think that is about it for today. I want to again thank you all for. Oh, that was sort of fast. Listening in. I do want to remind you, if you like this talk, you can read my articles on Fight Back News. In fact, there's a Fight Back News article that just came out a couple of days ago that has a lot of this content. And of course, if you're interested in actually organizing and gaining a revolutionary perspective on how to do that in the United States, you should check out the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. They're at frso.org/join. And so I invite everyone to check it out. I probably plan to be back next month, probably with not that good news, to be honest, but we shall just see. Everybody, please stay safe. The virus is out there, and it's going to be a rough ride for the next couple of weeks. All right, I will talk to you later, and thank you very much again.